I don't want some useless old hag living in the house during my pregnancy, my daughter-in-law said. My son just nodded. You should probably find another place to live. So I moved out. The next day, the new owner of the house was standing at their door. What he told them made them call me nonstop. Before we continue, I'd like to ask you to like this video to help promote it. Thank you. And now enjoy the story. So, how did it all happen? 6 months earlier, I had sold my house, a good, bright house with 3 bedrooms and an apple tree by the porch, to help the kids with their down payment. Ben had assured me then, "Mom, it's temporary. Really, just until we get on our feet." And I believed him because a mother believes her son, especially if she's been pulling the same harness her whole life. I moved into their converted garage, paid them rent for it, cooked, cleaned, did laundry, and even helped with the wiring and floors. I knew how. In 30 years with my late husband, we had brought more than one house to life with our own hands. And Chloe's pregnancy was difficult, so I was glad to be useful. As it turned out, I was only useful as long as it was convenient for them. And where, in your opinion, am I supposed to go? I had asked then, and even noted to myself my voice didn't tremble. I was holding it together as one should. Chloe finally looked up, her eyes cold, so empty. That's no longer our problem, Diane. We need the room for a nursery. Ben fidgeted, smiling awkwardly. There are those, retirement communities, Mom. Nice places. You'll meet people your own age. He didn't seem to notice how that phrase, your own age, cut like a knife, as if it were time to clear me out of the way so I wouldn't be underfoot. I had raised him alone after his father left. I remember pulling night shifts, then running to a second job, scrimping on myself just so my boy could have everything he needed. And here I was, standing in their kitchen, listening to them choose their words carefully to put me out on the curb like an old piece of furniture. But when you've been underestimated your whole life, you learn to keep your cards close to your chest and not to fuss. All right, I said calmly. I'll be gone by the weekend. Chloe gave a crooked, victorious smirk. Relief washed over Ben's face as if he'd dodged a bullet. I turned and walked back to my corner in the garage. And perhaps only the most observant person would have noticed the small, stubborn smile at the corners of my lips. 3 days later, I signed a lease on a small but warm and neat apartment downtown. Nothing special, but it was mine. Without the sound of someone else's sighs through the wall or whispers on the phone about her being here again. And when the moving truck pulled up to their gate, I actually laughed, imagining their faces. They did indeed look out the window. Chloe froze in the kitchen, as if she regretted it. But it was too late, my dear. Ben ran out to the truck as I was getting into a taxi. Mom, maybe we were too hasty? If you want, you can stay. And I, just as sweetly as he had once promised temporary, replied, No, dear. You've made your decision. I won't be a burden. The apartment was exactly what I needed right now. Bright, with clean walls, a window overlooking a courtyard where dogs played in the morning and old ladies sat on benches. And the quiet. A kind of quiet where you don't have to tiptoe around so as not to disturb your daughter-in-law's mood. And you don't have to pretend you don't hear her complaining to her friends about the live-in housekeeper. I unpacked my boxes, arranged my books, hung a towel I had embroidered on long winter evenings in the kitchen, and the phone rang. Diane Miles. A crisp, businesslike voice. This is from the agency. We're confirming. Your references are excellent. The management is pleased. We'll contact you about the position tomorrow. I smiled and sank into an armchair. It was so soft, just right for me. Good. I'm ready to start. We said our goodbyes. I poured myself a glass of dry wine, looked at my reflection in the dark glass, a woman with a straight back and calm eyes, and said to myself, well, here's to a new beginning. They didn't know then that I hadn't just moved out, but had exited their game and entered my own. They also didn't know that some of my quiet preparations, which they would have considered trivial, would soon become their biggest headache. But every story has its own pace, and I was in no hurry. Sometimes, it's enough to just remove the hand that has been covering for someone else's mistakes for years, and let everyone learn to stand on their own 2 feet. The phone rang while I was still fussing with my books, trying to figure out where to put the floor lamp to make the evenings cozy. I picked it up, and a crisp, businesslike voice introduced himself. Diane Miles? This is Victor Chun from Urban Corp Development. I'm confirming your references are excellent. My supervisor is very pleased with you. Are you ready to start work as a property inspector and consultant? I'm ready, I said, and I heard how calm it sounded. Excellent. We'll start the inspections tomorrow if that's convenient. And also, the owner is particularly interested in the house at 12 Maple Lane. I put the phone down and just sat for a few seconds, looking at my reflection in the glass of a bookshelf. A woman with a straight back in a clean blouse, in a new apartment where even the air seemed to breathe differently. I poured a little dry wine, raised the glass, and quietly said, "To a new chapter. 12 Maple Lane." An address I knew by heart, as if it had been under my skin my whole life. To be honest, I had been in contact with Urban Corp for about 3 weeks. When they kicked me out of the garage with the neat excuse, "We need a nursery," I stopped playing the heroine, sat down at my laptop, and started looking for a job where my hands and my experience were actually worth something. I found the contacts for Urban Corp Development, called, and explained that I knew the area like the back of my hand, that I understood which houses were tired and which were just neglected, and that I could discreetly, without scandals, review documents, talk to people, and document what was wrong. I was honest. Well, mostly honest. I mentioned I had lived in a converted garage, of course, but I emphasized the facts, not the complaints. It's cramped, damp in the spring, the wiring was done by friends. But to do it right, the house needs a lot of work, permits, specialists. The head of the department, Victor Chun, called me back himself. His voice was confident, businesslike, without any unnecessary pleasantries. "We're actually planning a redevelopment of that district. Let's give it a try. The schedule is flexible, the pay is decent. Can you handle it?" "I can," I said then, and hung up the phone with the feeling that, for the first time in a long time, I was stepping on solid ground. That night I slept soundly as I hadn't slept in, it seemed, 2 months. I didn't dream of other people's doors that I had to close quietly. I didn't dream of other people's whispered conversations in the kitchen about her being here again. In the morning, a shower, a clean blouse, a notebook in my bag, my ID, a pen, my phone. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop on the corner, 3 blocks from Maple Lane. I arrived a little early, sat by the window. The street sweepers were pushing wet leaves to the curb. Schoolchildren were dragging their backpacks. Someone was laughing on the phone. And from this, something inside me felt calm, at home. Chun arrived on time, not one for being late. A man in his early 40s, his suit fit perfectly. His gaze was quick but not piercing, just businesslike. He shook my hand firmly like a man. He sat across from me and nodded at my papers. "Diane, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. I've looked over your resume and references. We need someone with inside knowledge of the area. We're not just buying up properties at random. We have a planned streets, utilities, courtyards, lighting, roads. A higher standard means a higher price, higher taxes. Yes, it will be hard for some, but in the end the neighborhood will breathe differently. Do you understand that?" "I understand," I said. "And I understand where it's honestly better for people to sell and start over than to get into debt legalizing unpermitted construction. That's why I need you." He opened his tablet, swiped through photos, cadastral maps, extracts. "According to you, there's a young family at 12 Maple Lane, first mortgage, tight on money." "Yes," I nodded. "And the garage was converted into living space. There are no permits as far as I can tell. It was done by friends. If an inspection comes, it will all come out at once," I said without malice. "Just as it was." He made a note with his stylus, looked at his watch. "I want to make them an offer today. Cash, a quick closing without any hassle. Sometimes it's easier and more honest for young families to move to a quieter area and live within their means. Are you ready to walk through and look at the house with me?" "I'm ready," I replied. And only my fingers on the coffee cup grew a little warmer, as if the blood was flowing faster. We discussed the formalities, what kind of photos were needed, what I would document as a consultant, how to talk to people about unpermitted renovations without it sounding like a verdict. Victor wasn't a predator out for other people's tears. He counted numbers and deadlines, and that, strangely enough, calmed me. When a person has order in their head, you can do business with them. Outside, it smelled of damp asphalt and something bready from the nearby bakery. I adjusted the strap of my bag. We left and walked through the courtyards. A short path that I knew with my eyes closed because I had walked it hundreds of times over the past 6 months. Sometimes with bags, sometimes with laundry, sometimes with a pot of soup, trying not to spill it on the carpet. I walked and thought how strangely fast everything can change when you stop holding up other people's walls. Could you confirm the address one more time? So there are no mistakes in the paperwork? I asked as we turned the corner, although I already knew. Victor glanced at his tablet, nodded. 12 Maple Lane. I smiled the way people who know how to keep a straight face smile. Calmly, just a little. Yes, I said. I'm very familiar with this house. We reached the gate on Maple Lane and out of habit, I pressed the bell. The same dull click that I had heard hundreds of times when I brought home milk or hot soup, trying not to spill it. Chloe's face appeared in the window. It froze. Then she took a step back. A shadow on the curtain. Ben opened the door. A wrinkled shirt, sleepy eyes. Stubble. He'd clearly slept poorly. Can I help you? Victor held out his business card, spoke calmly, professionally, without any pressure. Victor Chan, Urban Corp Development. This is Diane, my assessment consultant. We'd like to discuss a business proposition regarding the house. I saw the gears turning in Ben's head. His gaze flickered from the business card to me, back and once more to the card. His lips trembled. Mom. Hello, Ben, I said evenly. May we come in? Mr. Chan has taken an interest in your property. Chloe came into the hallway. Her belly was round now. Her hand instinctively rested on her side, and her voice was dry, clipped. What is she doing here? Victor looked at the three of us, quickly, pointedly, like a man who can read a situation before a word is spoken. You know each other? Diane is my mother-in-law, Chloe exhaled. Was, I corrected her gently. I was asked to find my own place. Now I work as a consultant, and I know this house better than most. Let's sit down, Victor concluded, and in the living room, he laid out a folder, his tablet, and some printouts on the coffee table. I sat in the armchair that they had never once offered me while I was living in the garage, and I noted how strangely easy it is to breathe when you've come here on business, and not on the terms of a tolerated, and therefore superfluous, relative. Straight to the point, Victor said. We are prepared to offer you $600,000 in cash. A clean deal, closing within a month. We'll take the house in its current condition. Chloe gasped. Ben's lips parted on their own. We're not selling. We just bought it. I understand, Victor nodded. But it's important for you to know that the entire district is already slated for a utility upgrade. Sewer, electrical, fiber optics. Roads, sidewalks. That means noise, dirt, closures, heavy machinery, months of work. He turned a page, showed them a diagram with arrows and dates. And the second point is compliance. According to a preliminary assessment, there are many unpermitted improvements on this street. When the city issues our permits, inspections automatically extend to the neighbors. If any unpermitted alterations are found, there will be citations, fines, deadlines. I saw Ben's Adam's apple bob, and Chloe's face became thin, sharp. We did everything carefully, she squeaked. I believe you, Victor replied calmly. But an inspection isn't satisfied with carefully. It needs documents. So you have, in essence, two paths. A fast and expensive one to bring everything up to code, or to sell at a decent price and peacefully move to a place where you won't have to juggle a mortgage and renovations on your nerves. You could hear the clock ticking above the television. Loudly, as if it hadn't ticked so loudly before, we just hadn't been listening. How much time do we have? Ben asked, not looking at me or Chloe. Construction starts in 6 weeks. Victor looked at his calendar. The offer is valid until Friday. That's enough time to consult with each other and make an adult decision. He handed a business card to Ben, placed a second one next to his tablet. If you have any questions about the timeline and the phases, Diane is aware of the schedule. We're nearby, we won't disappear. On the threshold, I paused for a second, unintentionally, just to breathe in the damp air of the yard, which smelled of wet earth and last year's leaves. I turned. Take care, you two. I hope everything works out as it should, I said, almost affectionately. And that almost was like a button I had pressed for myself. No malice, no sweetness. Just a check mark. Victor and I walked out the gate. He understood without words that now was not the time to talk, and we walked silently to his car. My phone vibrated as I was fastening my seatbelt. Ben's name lit up the screen. Then Chloe's, then Ben's again. I watched my son's name flash and fade, like a person blinking in the dark, who has finally realized that the light won't turn on by itself. I put the phone in my bag, zipped it up and sat up straighter. They had exactly 5 days until Friday, and each of them would be more expensive than the last. The phone rang incessantly all the way home. Ben, then Chloe, then Ben again. And I honestly let them call into the void because sometimes silence is the best thing you can say to adults who are used to you picking up on the first ring. On the third call, I finally answered. Hello, Ben. Mom, what is going on? This Chen guy says they're going to tear up the whole neighborhood, that there will be inspections. Do you understand? His voice was high, nervous, like in his teenage years when he had first come home late and was afraid of my look. Watch your words, Ben, I said calmly. Urban Corp doesn't dig for pleasure. It improves. For those who are willing to sell, that's a good thing. We don't want to sell. We just took out a mortgage. With my money, I reminded him gently. 50,000 from my savings, which I will never see again. There was a long, thick silence on the other end. Mom, Yes, we acted badly, he squeezed out in a whisper. Chloe was. It's the pregnancy, the hormones. Don't you dare blame on hormones what is called character, I said. I didn't raise my voice, but something inside my chest snapped. Chloe told me to my face that I was useless. And you nodded. That's not an accident. It's a choice. And every choice has consequences. So this is revenge, he snapped. You've decided to kick us out of our own home? Don't twist my words, I sighed. The city has been moving towards redevelopment for a long time. Victor was looking at this district without me. I just told the truth about your paperwork. Everything else is your decision. I hung up, put the kettle on, made myself a strong tea with honey, and sat by the window. The courtyard was wet. Sparrows were arguing on the maple tree. An old woman in the courtyard was carrying a heavy bag. A neighbor was helping her. And from this ordinary picture I felt a little better. I hadn't even finished my tea when there was a knock on the door. Not a ring but a knock, hurried, frantic. Through the peephole, Chloe. Mascara streaked, her face crumpled, her hand on her belly, staring straight at the door. I opened it, but I didn't invite her in. Please, she said immediately, without any preamble. I was wrong. I snapped. I'm worried about the baby. But this is insane, Diane. You can't ruin our lives over words. I leaned my shoulder against the doorframe and looked at her calmly, without any schadenfreude, the way you look at a person who has finally understood the price of their own manners. Over words, I repeated. For 6 months, you did everything to make me feel superfluous in my own son's home. Words is when someone is rude to you at the market, and you forget about it. When a person is put out the door, that's an action. But we're family, she sobbed. Family is supposed to stick together. Family is when you're valued, not used, I said. You made your choice. You were more comfortable without me. I understood and I left. What do you want? Name a price. We'll pay you back. She darted her eyes around as if the numbers themselves would jump into her wallet. With what money? You live from paycheck to paycheck, a baby is on the way. Even if you wanted to, you couldn't. And it's not about the money. Then how do we fix this? She finally asked, what she should have asked from the very beginning. You can't unring a bell, I replied. There's an honest offer from Chan. Sell and start with a clean slate, somewhere you can afford. It's better than getting into debt to legalize unpermitted construction, and living in fear of every inspection. Chloe frowned, her lips tightening. And what did you mean, you were protecting us? You told Ben on the phone, what was that about? I smiled at the corner of my mouth. Not maliciously, more tiredly. It means that while I was living with you, I was quietly patching your holes. Remember when I asked about the papers for the garage? I had already arranged with people to get it all legalized properly. But you were in a hurry to clear the room for a nursery, weren't you? Well, you cleared it. Her phone trembled in her hand. She glanced at the screen, her face turning even paler. Ben is on his way, she whispered. Good, I said. It's time to talk honestly, without any fairy tales about the bad mother-in-law. About 10 minutes later, the door was pushed open as if a life depended on it. Mom, we need to talk. Ben came in without taking off his shoes, stopping in the middle of the doormat like a schoolboy caught in a lie. Chloe said, You admitted you set this all up? I didn't admit to anything of the sort, I replied evenly. You're confusing setting up with stopping to interfere with reality. What does that mean? He was genuinely confused, and at that moment for the first time I felt a twinge of human pity for him. I went to the kitchen, placed an empty mug for him next to mine, just so his hands wouldn't hang uselessly. I returned to the hallway and looked my son in the eyes. It means, Ben, that I didn't ruin your life. I just stopped propping you up. And then came that silence before the storm, short, dense, when you can still turn back, but there's nowhere to go. The silence was so thick you could hear the old paint crackling on the radiator. I sighed, went to the kitchen, opened the drawer by the stove, the one where you keep everything just in case. Rubber bands, pushpins, receipts, and took out a brown folder. I returned to the hallway, placed it on the dresser, and opened it. What's that? Ben asked, already understanding but clinging to the appearance of ignorance. A notification from the Department of Urban Planning and the Housing Inspectorate. Your street was included in a pre-redevelopment inspection 3 months ago. You need to confirm compliance with all regulations. The letters were sent to the owners on Maple Lane. The previous owners forwarded it to the realtor. The realtor to me because in the loan documents, I am listed as the person who contributed a portion of the down payment, I said calmly, without any pressure. That's why I asked you about the garage permit back in February. Chloe took the papers as if they were a hot frying pan, with 2 fingers, afraid of getting burned. She scanned them, her lips tightening. So what? Ben said hoarsely. So, I had already made arrangements. Measurements, a project, a technical passport to legalize the conversion, to replace the main electrical cable where needed, insulation, ventilation. A couple of weeks of work, about $20,000. I wanted to do it quietly so you wouldn't have to run around and worry. I wanted everything to be clean for you by the time the inspection came. He sank onto a stool by the door, as if his legs had been cut out from under him. Chloe stood, holding her belly, and for the first time she was truly silent. Why didn't you do it? Ben exhaled without looking up. Because I was asked to vacate the room for a nursery, I said. And strangely at that moment I felt light. I canceled the work. Gifts are for loved ones. With neighbors you settle accounts. Mom! He looked up at me, with the same boyish eyes he'd had when he was 10 and had broken a window in the courtyard. Can we still make it? We'll pay somehow. No, I replied quietly. Not somehow now. No. First, you have 5 days until Friday and 6 weeks until the digging starts. Second, after your room for a nursery, I have no moral right to become your life raft again. You are adults. Make a decision and bear the consequences yourselves. Chloe let out a small, almost soundless sob. So you're abandoning us when we... She began. I've stopped propping you up, I interrupted. Those are 2 different things. We stood for another minute. Then, somehow suddenly older, they left, closing the door behind them carefully, without a slam. I gathered the folder, put it back in the drawer, put the kettle on, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was breathing with my full chest, without the weight of other people's expectations on my shoulders. Everything went as it should with people who are used to living on a maybe. In the morning, 3 missed calls from Ben, 1 from Chloe. I didn't answer. I sat with a cup of tea by the window, watching the janitor sweep the wet courtyard, watching a neighbor hang baby clothes on a line, and I thought that sometimes the kindest thing is to leave a person face to face with their own decisions. By noon, Victor called. Diane, briefly. The owners of 12 Maple Lane have requested a meeting. They're asking if the legalization work can be paid in installments. I told them that due to the project timeline, that's not possible. The city has deadlines. They've asked for the weekend to think it over. Let them think, I said and stirred honey into my tea. Sometimes a thought only comes when it hurts. Understood, he replied. I'll keep you posted. I hung up, leaned against the cold glass. And at that moment, it seemed to me that the sky over the courtyard had become a shade lighter. I didn't know yet that by evening, someone would start pulling other people's strings, and these strings would be given the official name, a complaint. The next morning began with the now familiar pinging. Messages, calls, more messages. Ben, please, flashed on the screen. I put the phone on silent, made a strong tea, held my face over the warm steam, and thought that sometimes the best thing you can do for your loved ones is not to live their lives for them. Half an hour later, there was a pounding on the door, not a knock-knock but an impatient, insistent pounding. Through the peephole, Ben. He was sitting on the floor by my doormat, knees pulled up, his back against the wall. He would sob, then slump again like a little boy who doesn't know what to say. I didn't open the door. What new could we say to each other that we hadn't said yesterday? About 3 hours later, silence. The rustle of paper under the door. I waited, then picked up the note. Mom, we messed up. Chloe is scared for the baby. We have no one else to turn to. You always fixed everything. Please fix this. Ben. I folded the note neatly into a square and put it in the same drawer where I keep letters, photographs, and other things I've decided to keep but not to look at again. On Friday morning it started to rain. Not a downpour, but that persistent gray drizzle that makes everything in the courtyard look dusty. An unfamiliar number rang. Diane Miles. Yes. Mortgage Department, First City Bank. My name is. The voice was businesslike, neutral. Your son listed you as a contact person. He applied for a home equity line of credit today. According to our specialist's assessment, there are some issues with the legality of the renovations on the property. We need confirmation that the property will be brought into compliance. Your son mentioned that you would be taking on the work and the paperwork. I chuckled under my breath. There seems to be a misunderstanding. I am not taking on any work. He assured us that you and I, quote, managed the construction, would organize everything, and would pay for it. That's why we're calling you. I was a secretary at an insurance company for 30 years, I said calmly. When I was living with my son, I did intend to help with the legalization, as a decent human being. But now, I am in no position to promise the bank something I have no intention of promising. I see, the woman replied after a pause. Then, unfortunately, we cannot approve the application until the violations are rectified. 5 minutes later, Ben called, already agitated. Mom, why did you tell the bank you wouldn't help? You said everything was arranged. I said that when I considered myself a part of your family, I replied. It was supposed to be my gift for the birth of your child, to quietly get everything in order and leave so you could live in peace. But you kicked me out. Gifts are for loved ones, Ben. With those who put you out the door, you settle accounts. You're ruining our lives out of spite. It's not spite, it's boundaries, I said, and I felt everything inside me become even. I'm not destroying anything. I've just stopped holding you up. You're adults. Try to do it yourselves. There was a long silence on the other end, then quietly, what do you want from us? For you to solve your own problem for the first time, and to bear it without putting it on my shoulders. On Saturday they called again, but this time politely and in time with the rain. Through the peephole, 2 people. A man and a woman, familiar faces, only older and more tired. Chloe's parents, Frederick and Lydia. I opened the door, led them to the kitchen and made tea. Diane, let's talk. Frederick sat up straight. No beating around the bush. Chloe was crying yesterday. She says the house is in jeopardy. Inspections money. We'll help, of course, if we have to, but we'd like to understand what's really going on. I placed that same brown folder on the table, untied the ribbon, and laid out the letters from the housing inspectorate, the printouts, my notes on when the notification came, what they had asked for, who I had called, how much it would have cost to legalize when everything fell through. I told them in their own words, without embellishment. I repeated the phrase that had gotten me kicked out. Useless old hag. Lydia turned pale, clutching her mug as if for warmth. Frederick clenched his jaw. We didn't raise her to be like that, he said gruffly. Life sometimes turns people in strange ways, I replied, especially when someone else does the inconvenient work for them for a long time, holding up the walls. And now what? Lydia asked quietly. How can this be fixed? The family? Not everything can be fixed, I said honestly. The house, they either sell it according to Urban Corp's offer and start with a clean slate, or they get into debt and deadlines, risking red seals on their doors. A family can only be held together by respect, not convenience. That takes a long time to learn. As he was leaving, Frederick nodded. Thank you for not being angry. We'll have a talk with our daughter. A hard one. When the door closed behind them, the apartment became especially quiet. And in this silence I suddenly found relief, as if a bag of cement had been lifted from my shoulders. I don't have to save anyone but myself. On Monday morning, a call from Victor. His voice was as collected as ever, but with a hard edge. Diane, we have a problem. A complaint has been filed with the City Commission against Urban Corp, claiming we're pressuring residents, intimidating them, forcing them to sell. The signatory is Frederick. I closed my eyes with my hand. So a third party had pulled a string. The city is launching an investigation. They'll be looking at our procedures, interviewing everyone who was involved in selecting the addresses. You two. They want to talk to you today. I looked at my mug, at the hands of the clock, and at the window where it was no longer drizzling, but just a gray light hung. A Real Boston Monday. All right, Victor, I said. Let them know I'm ready. Let them set a time. I hung up the phone, but my heart didn't. It skipped a beat and stopped halfway, because in conversations like these, the most interesting part begins not on the phone, but behind an office door. I arrived at the city reception office a little early. I hate running at the last minute when my heart is already in my throat. I sat on a chair against the wall, placed the brown folder on my lap, and ran my hand over the cardboard as if it were a wallet. Everything I needed was inside, nothing extra. The corridor smelled of fresh paint and wet umbrellas. People came and went, whispering, doors clicking. I watched the hands of the clock and breathed evenly, the way I had learned to breathe when you need to drag a heavy box to the elevator and not scream. Diane Miles. A voice called from a slightly ajar door. The office was rather empty, the light was cold, a table, 2 chairs, a cup with pens, a voice recorder. The woman across from me was younger than I expected, but her gaze was sharp, attentive. She introduced herself as Svetlana Chan, from the Urban Planning Committee. I noted to myself, the same name as the woman from Urban Corp, but this was the government, not a business, and I nodded. Please tell me about your work as a consultant for Urban Corp. She turned on the recorder. I help to assess the district, the condition of the houses, the documents, where there are risks of unpermitted renovations. I document the facts, I said without rushing. How long have you been collaborating? 3 or 4 weeks. I approached them myself when I was looking for a job. The district was in their plans before me. Your relationship to the house at 12 Maple Lane? It's my son and his wife's house, I replied directly. I lived there for the past 6 months in the garage, which was converted into a living space. A pause. The scratching of a pen on paper. Is it correct that you informed the company of possible violations at this particular address? I informed them of what is in the documents and what is a fact. I opened my folder, passed her the notifications, the printouts across the table. 3 months ago, the street was included in a pre-redevelopment inspection. The house has a garage converted into a living space without a full set of permits. While I was living there, I began the process of legalization measurements, a project, a technical passport contractors. I wanted to resolve the issue before the inspection, but it wasn't resolved. I looked up at her. I was asked to move out. I canceled the work, I said calmly. Gifts are for those who consider you close. Another pause. I heard a door slam somewhere in the corridor, and someone walked past quickly. The clicking of heels. 1, 2, 3, and then silence. Some might see your actions as an attempt to pressure your relatives into selling the house, she said, without expression. Some might see their actions as what is commonly called used and discarded, I replied, just as evenly. I did not persuade them to sell. I stopped covering for them. The district would have been inspected anyway. My job is not persuasion. It's facts. Did you understand that the information you were providing could influence their decision? I understood that the lack of information would hit them harder, I said. To hide from young people that they have an unpermitted construction is not protection. It's a disservice. We went around in circles for a while longer. Who called first? When did you find out about the city's plans? How much would the legalization have cost? Were you willing to pay for it? And I answered as if dictating calmly, without the details they didn't ask for, but also without any sweet justifications. She asked to keep copies of the letters, took a couple of photos on her official phone, and closed her notebook. Last question, she said, already turning off the recorder. Do you want your son to sell the house? I thought for a second, not for effect, but to tell the truth. I want him to make an adult decision for the first time and to stand by it, I replied. Selling is one of the honest paths, but the choice is theirs. She looked at me without any iron in her eyes, just as a person, and said quietly, not for the record. Family stories rarely have a happy ending. Also not for the record, I replied. Sometimes they do grow a spine. After you stop propping them up. We stood up. She held out her hand. A brief handshake without any excessive warmth or coldness. We'll be in touch, she said, in that voice that promises nothing extra. The corridor was empty. Only the clock on the wall was ticking, like the one in their house above the television, loudly, as if to remind you that time goes on without us. I clutched my folder to my chest and went outside. The rain had stopped, it was just gray. I stood for a few minutes on the steps until my fingers stopped trembling. My phone vibrated in my bag, an unfamiliar number. I pressed accept and heard a dry male voice from the city office. Diane Miles? A preliminary decision has been made in your case. We need your response today. That same evening, the committee called back. The voice was dry, official, without any attempt to be pleasant. They thanked me for the materials, clarified a couple of dates, and asked for written confirmation that the copies could be attached to the investigation. And that was it. I hung up and sat for a long time by the window with a cup, watching the courtyard exhale after the rain, watching the kids run through the puddles, and I thought that sometimes justice is not fanfares at all, but a neat stamp on the last page. 3 days later, Victor called. Diane, they've closed the investigation. No violations were found in our procedures. Your work was recognized as correct. Frederick withdrew his complaint and apologized. It seems he had a serious talk with his daughter. I see, I said. Thank you for keeping me informed. And also they've requested a meeting. The offer is still valid until Friday. That same evening the doorbell rang. On my doormat, Ben and Chloe, as if they had aged 10 years in 1 week. Ben had shadows under his eyes. Chloe's face was transparent, her hand on her belly. I opened the door, but I didn't step aside. Mom, we owe you an apology, Ben said quietly. Several, Chloe added, and for the first time her voice was human without any arrogance. I nodded. Go on. My parents told me what you did. Chloe's eyes were downcast. How you were gathering the papers, making arrangements, how you wanted to get everything settled before the inspection. And we showed our true colors. Yes, I agreed. You did. Can we fix this? Ben asked. And in that, can we? There was none of the old confidence that Mom would always provide a shoulder to lean on. Fix it? No, I said quietly. but you can move forward in a new way. Without false tenderness, without using people. A family is held together by respect, not convenience. We want to do the right thing. Chloe clutched the hem of her coat. But we don't know how. There are two honest paths, I replied. You bring everything into order at your own expense and on time, and you bear the loan, the nerves, and the responsibility. Or you sell according to Urban Corp's offer and start over, more modestly, but within your means. In any case, these are your decisions and your consequences, not mine. They exchanged glances, and for the first time, I saw the same expression on their faces, tired but without any childish resentment, like people who have realized that from now on, they are on their own. As he was leaving, Ben asked, "Will you ever forgive us?" "Forgiveness is not the erasing of memory," I replied. "I will be able to communicate with you normally when I see that you respect not only my help but also my boundaries." "We'll try," he nodded. "Trying is too late," I said without anger. "Do." 2 weeks later, they sold the house. $600,000, a quick closing. They paid off the bank and came out ahead. Not fabulously, but honestly. About $100,000 in cash. It was enough for a small house in another area, without any agonizing between want and can. Chloe gave birth to a healthy, loud baby girl. They invited me to the hospital, not as a temporary relative, but as a person it would be shameful not to respect. They named the baby Diane. I smiled but said nothing. It was up to them to decide what that name meant to them. A memory, an apology, or just a pretty sound. We didn't rush to mend our relationship the very next day, and that was perhaps the most adult thing. For 6 months we learned to talk to each other again, briefly, to the point, without any always and never, without any request to bail us out urgently. I put the first shared dinner plate on the table 6 months later. Borscht, garlic bread, a tiny hand reaching out from the cradle. Ba. And my eyes unexpectedly stung. But I held back because this time I could only cry from relief, not from self-pity. A year has passed since then. My relationship with Ben and Chloe is smaller in scope but stronger in substance. They call not to ask me to do something but to ask, "How are you?" I visit not to save them but as a guest, and I leave on time when the conversation is over. Chloe has learned to keep her mouth shut when she wants to say something cutting just for relief. Ben has learned not to hide behind other people's skirts and not to confuse motherly love with a free service. I am 65. I have my own apartment, a job I do well. I inspect, I write reports, I talk to people calmly without pressure. And for that, I am respected by Urban Corp, by those who decide to sell, and by those who stay and legalize. Sometimes on my way home, I stop on a bench by the entrance, listen to the neighborhood kids arguing about who can run to the maple tree the fastest, and I think that in this story there was no victory over them. There was a victory over my former self, the one who had agreed for too long to be convenient. The most loving thing we can sometimes do for our loved ones is to stop living for them, and to let their decisions become their teachers. It's not loud and it's not pretty, but it's honest. Thank you for listening. If you'd like, write in the comments what city you're from and what your turning point was. Other people's stories sometimes hold us up better than any support. Thank you for listening to this story to the end. Write the word justice in the comments if you watched until this moment. Your support is very important to me. Stay with us. We have many more interesting and real-life stories. All the best.